The rain hammered against the cracked windows of Melissa Parker's minivan. She sat in the parking lot of the foreclosure office, her hands trembling, round a cashier's check for $2 or 100. Every penny she had left after the divorce, after the layoffs, after the medical bills that came when her youngest 6-year-old Lucas needed heart surgery. In the back seat, her 3 children slept fitfully. Lucas clutching his worn teddy bear, 8-year-old Sophia with her face pressed against the window, and 12-year-old Nathan pretending to sleep while secretly watching his mother cry. Melissa wasn't supposed to be here. 6 months ago, she'd been a project manager at a tech firm living in a 4-bedroom house with a pool planning family vacations to Hawaii. But life has a way of unraveling faster than you can hold the threads together. First came the diagnosis. Lucas needed heart surgery. Then her husband left, draining their accounts and disappearing with his assistant. The company downsized. The house went into foreclosure. And suddenly Melissa Parker found herself sleeping in a minivan with 3 kids searching for any shelter she could afford. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the November downpour. Melissa stared at the check in her hands, the culmination of pawned wedding rings, sold furniture, and borrowed money. $2,100. Not even enough for first month's rent and security deposit on the smallest apartment in town. Not enough to restart a life for 4 people. A crack of thunder made Lucas whimper in his sleep. Melissa reached back and stroked his hair, whispering reassurances she didn't feel. For weeks, she'd maintained a facade of adventure. Sleeping in the van was camping, washing in gas station bathrooms was an expedition, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner was a picnic. But the children weren't fooled anymore. Nathan had stopped asking when they were going home. Sophia had stopped drawing pictures of houses. And Lucas just clutched his bear tighter and asked fewer questions. Melissa opened her laptop, the battery warning flashing red. One more search for housing, one more desperate attempt before the laptop died and took her last connection to normality with it. She typed cheapest property, Sonoma County. The results were predictable. Rundown mobile homes starting at $30,000, empty lots in flood zones, timeshare scams. She scrolled, eyes burning from exhaustion, when something caught her attention. Abandoned Santa Rosa train station. Historic property as is condition. Starting bid $200. The listing had been posted just hours ago. The foreclosure office was handling the auction for the county. The photos showed a hulking brick building, windows boarded up, weeds growing through the platform. Built in 1887, abandoned since 1987, when the railroad redirected its routes. No utilities, no certificate of occupancy, likely condemned. Melissa enlarged the image. 3 stories of weathered red brick, a slate roof partially caved in on one side, large oak doors and walls, solid thick walls that could keep out the rain, space enough for each child to have their own corner, shelter when the world had stopped offering any. Her finger hovered over the phone number. This was madness. She had 3 children. They needed running water, electricity, safety. But they also needed to stop sleeping in a minivan before Child Protective Services inevitably became involved. Before Lucas caught pneumonia from the damp November air. Before Nathan's increasing anger at their situation turned into something worse. Melissa dialed before she could talk herself out of it. The real estate agent answered on the 4th ring, his voice groggy with sleep. What kind of person buys an abandoned train station? A desperate one. A mother with nowhere else to go. A woman with $200 and 3 children who deserved walls around them. The real estate agent, a thin man named Peterson, who kept checking his watch, couldn't hide his disbelief as he met her the next morning at the station. The fog hung thick around them, the building looming like a ghost ship emerging from mist. Peterson glanced from Melissa to the children waiting in the van, then back to the building, as if trying to make sense of the connection between them. Lady, that place has been sitting empty for 45 years. No electricity, no running water, probably full of asbestos. The city's considered demolishing it 3 times, but never had the budget. I've got a nice mobile home listed for $3,500. Peterson paused, key dangling from his fingers. You sure about this? We'll take the station. Melissa's jaw set with determination. It wasn't a choice. It was the only option left. After Peterson left, shaking his head and muttering about foolish decisions, Melissa stood with her children in the echoing main hall. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through holes in the roof. The ticket windows were covered in cobwebs. The old wooden benches where travelers once sat were long gone, probably burned for firewood by transients years ago. Okay, team. Melissa clapped her hands, the sound bouncing off the high ceiling. Let's explore our castle. Nathan kicked at a pile of debris, his face a mask of teenage skepticism. This isn't a castle, Mom. This is where people go to in horror movies. Nathan. Melissa's tone carried a warning, but she couldn't blame him. The station was a monument to abandonment. Graffiti covered the lower walls. The windows on the first floor had been bricked over decades ago. The platform where thousands of passengers once waited for their futures now cracked under the weight of neglect. But Sophia was already racing across the dusty floor, her voice echoing. It's so big. Can I have the ticket booth for my room? Lucas stayed close to Melissa, his small hand gripping her jacket. Is this our new house, Mommy? It's going to be. Melissa forced brightness into her voice. We just need to fix it up a little. They spent the morning mapping their new domain. The main floor held what was once a grand passenger waiting area, ticket offices, and the remnants of what might have been a small restaurant or cafe. High ceilings with ornate moldings now crumbling with water damage. Large windows, most broken, but a few still intact, letting in shafts of light that illuminated swirling dust. The second floor contained administrative offices, their doors hanging open like broken teeth, revealing empty rooms with peeling wallpaper and scattered papers yellow with age. Filing cabinets stood rusted and abandoned, some tipped over as if in haste. Nathan found a faded railroad timetable from 1982 and folded it carefully into his pocket, their first souvenir of their new home. The third floor was a mystery. The stairs ended at a locked door marked railroad personnel only. The heavy padlock had rusted shut, seemingly untouched for decades. Nathan pushed against it, but the door didn't budge. Sophia ran her fingers along the walls, discovering faded murals beneath layers of grime. Scenes of trains traversing mountains and deserts painted in what must have once been vibrant colors. Look. Mom pictures. Lucas discovered a row of ancient payphones, their cords-cut receivers missing. He pretended to make calls, his small voice echoing. Hello, can I have a pizza delivered to the train station, please? In one corner, Melissa found a stack of moth-eaten blankets, evidence that others had sought shelter here before them. She tried not to think about the legality of what they were doing. Yes, she had purchased the property, but it wasn't zoned for residential use. There were no utilities, no safety inspections, probably 100 code violations. But it was better than the van, better than nothing. As the children continued exploring, Melissa calculated what she could do with their meager resources. The cashier's check had gone to purchase the property. She had exactly $107 in cash, remaining 2 credit cards maxed out, and whatever she could scavenge or borrow. They needed water, heat, light, basic sanitation, security. Sophia's voice carried from across the main hall. Mom, I found weird marks on the floor. Melissa crossed to where her daughter was crouched, running her fingers along a series of scratches in the dusty floor. They looked like someone had dragged something heavy, recently, judging by the clarity of the marks through the decades of dust. The scratches led toward the ticket counter but stopped abruptly. Probably just vandals. Melissa dismissed it, unwilling to add another worry to her mounting concerns. Let's check if the bathrooms still work. They didn't. The plumbing had been shut off decades ago. The bathroom fixtures remained, cracked porcelain sinks and toilets with wooden seats, but no running water. Another problem to solve. As afternoon faded into evening, they set up camp in what had been the station master's office, the only room with all its windows intact. Melissa spread the blankets she'd brought from the van on the floor, creating a nest for the children. She set up the camping lantern, casting the room in a warm glow that almost made it feel homey. For dinner, they had peanut butter sandwiches again, but Melissa had splurged on a bag of potato chips, a celebration of their new home. Nathan ate silently, his eyes continuously scanning the shadows. Sophia chattered excitedly about which corner would be her bedroom and how she would decorate it with drawings. Lucas fell asleep mid-bite, exhaustion finally catching up with him. After tucking the children in, Melissa wandered the main hall alone, the beam of her flashlight creating islands of visibility in the vast darkness. The station felt alive at night, creaking and settling the wind, finding paths through broken windows to whistle down empty corridors. She could almost imagine the ghosts of travelers past, rushing to catch trains that would never arrive again. Behind the old ticket counter, Melissa's flashlight beam caught something she hadn't noticed earlier. A narrow door painted the same institutional green as the walls designed to be invisible to passengers. The lock had been broken years ago, The door frame splintered as if someone had forced their way in or out. Melissa hesitated. The smart thing would be to wait until morning to explore with better light. But curiosity pulled at her, and she needed to know every inch of their new home, especially the places that might hide dangers from her children. "Mom, I don't like this." Nathan's voice startled her. He had followed silently, his own small flashlight in hand. "Stay here with your sister and brother." Melissa kept her voice steady. "I'm just going to check if it's safe." The door opened with a groan of rusty hinges. Beyond it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. Melissa aimed her flashlight down the wooden steps, which appeared surprisingly intact compared to much of the station. The beam of light couldn't penetrate to the bottom of the staircase, revealing only a void of darkness beyond. A shiver ran up Melissa's spine, not fear exactly, but a premonition, as if she stood at the threshold of something that would change everything. She placed her foot on the first step, testing its strength. It held firm. She continued down one careful step at a time, the wood creaking beneath her weight. The basement stretched the full length of the building to the forest of brick archways and support columns. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and old paper. Melissa's flashlight caught shapes in the darkness. Old filing cabinets, broken furniture, stacks of forgotten ledgers. The walls were lined with shelves containing dusty boxes labeled with years 1965, 1972, 1980, the administrative debris of a century of railroad operation. And along the far wall, a row of metal lockers. They were massive industrial-grade storage units, each one 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Unlike everything else in the station, they looked oddly pristine, as if someone had been maintaining them. Each bore a brass number plate, 0001 through 002. Melissa approached the first locker. The lock was a heavy-duty padlock, but age had not been kind to it. Rust had weakened the metal, and the mechanism had likely seized decades ago. She found a rusted pipe on the floor and used it as a lever, wedging it through the lock's hasp. With a grunt of effort, she pushed. The lock snapped with surprising ease. The locker's door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside, stacked from floor to ceiling, were metal boxes, each about the size of a small microwave, gunmetal gray with reinforced corners. Melissa pulled one out, noting its substantial weight. On the top, a simple label, Redwood Pacific Railroad. Financial records, 1977. She lifted the lid. Her flashlight clattered to the floor. The box was filled with certificates, bond certificates, each one ornately decorated with complex borders and official seals. Bearer bonds, the kind that belonged to whoever physically held them. No names, no records, as anonymous as cash. Each one marked with a denomination that made Melissa's vision blur. $1 million. She counted with shaking fingers. 20 bonds per box. 10 boxes in this locker alone. $200 million hidden in a forgotten train station that she had just purchased for the price of a used car. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the main floor. Not the light patter of her children, but I thought that heavy, deliberate steps. Then Nathan's voice drifted down high and frightened. "Mom, there's someone here." Melissa grabbed her flashlight and ran for the stairs, her mind reeling. As she emerged into the light of the main hall, she saw them. 2 men in dark suits standing just inside the entrance. Her children huddled behind a pillar, Nathan's arm protectively around his siblings. The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was in his 50s, with short-cropped gray hair and the rigid posture of military or law enforcement. His companion remained by the door, hand resting inside his jacket. "Mrs. Parker," the older man's voice echoed in the empty station. "We need to talk about what you just found." "How do you know my name?" Melissa positioned herself between the men and her children, mind racing for an explanation that didn't involve the boxes in the basement. "I'm Agent Brennan, Treasury Department." The man produced a badge so quickly Melissa barely glimpsed it. "This is Agent Cruz. We've been monitoring this property." Melissa pulled her children closer. "Monitoring? It's been abandoned for decades." "Abandoned doesn't mean forgotten, Mrs. Parker." Brennan's eyes were cold gray like winter sky. "What did you see downstairs?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Melissa's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. Brennan smiled that non-smile again. "You broke the lock on locker 001. Your fingerprints are all over the box containing bearer bonds that were reported stolen in 1978. He stepped closer, and Melissa fought the urge to back away. 24 lockers, approximately $220 million in untraceable securities, hidden here by a railroad executive named Richard Hamilton before he died in a very convenient car accident. Melissa's throat went dry. I just bought this place. I don't know anything about— Of course you don't, Brennan interrupted, which is why we're going to make this simple. You're going to sign the property back over to the government. We'll refund your purchase price plus, let's say, $10,000 for your trouble. You take your children and find somewhere else to live. Everyone wins. And if I don't— The words escaped before Melissa could reconsider the wisdom of challenging a federal agent. Brennan's expression hardened. Then we investigate how a divorced mother of 3 with no income suddenly has the means to purchase property. We examine your finances. Child services gets involved. His gaze shifted deliberately to the children. These things can drag on for years, and children suffer when their parents make poor choices. You're threatening my kids. Melissa's voice trembled with anger. I'm explaining reality. Brennan pulled out a document from his inner pocket. Sign this. Take the money. Walk away. Or don't and discover how deep certain holes can go. Melissa looked at the paper, then at her children. Lucas was crying silently. Sophia had her arms wrapped around him. Nathan stood straight, trying to be brave, but his hands shook at his sides. Every instinct screamed at her to sign to run to protect her babies. But something else stirred, the same steel that had kept her going through the divorce, through the bankruptcy, through nights of sleeping in the van and pretending it was an adventure. I need time to think. She folded the paper without signing. You have 24 hours. Brennan placed his card on a dusty ledge. We'll be watching. After they left, Melissa locked every door she could find and gathered her children in the station master's office. Their temporary sanctuary felt violated now. The shadows deeper, the creaks more ominous. Pack your things, she said, voice calm, despite the storm inside her. But Mom Sophia protested. You said this was our house. It is, baby. We're just going to camp somewhere else tonight. She drove them to a motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash for a room with her dwindling resources. Once the children were asleep, 3 to a bed with Lucas in the middle, Melissa sat in the bathroom with her laptop searching Richard Hamilton Railroad Executive Santa Rosa Station. The articles were buried deep, but she found them. Richard Hamilton had been the chief financial officer for Redwood Pacific Railroad. In 1978, he'd been accused of embezzling millions in bearer bonds, untraceable securities that belonged to whoever physically held them. Before he could be arrested, his car had gone off a cliff on Highway 1. The bonds were never recovered. But there was more. Hamilton had tried to reach out to a journalist before his death, claiming he'd discovered something about government contracts, about money being siphoned from railroad subsidies to fund classified operations. The journalist had been found dead 2 days after Hamilton's apparent suicide. Melissa's hands trembled as she read. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about secrets worth killing for. And she just stumbled into the middle of it. A soft knock at the door made her heart stop. She closed the laptop and crept to the peephole, expecting to see Brennan or his partner. Instead, a woman in her 60s stood outside. Silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a simple navy blazer and slacks. She was alone, her hands visible at her sides. Mrs. Parker, the woman's voice was low, urgent. My name is Director Eleanor Hamilton. I ran the task force that's been looking for those bonds for 30 years. I think Agent Brennan gave you the wrong impression. May we talk? Melissa's mind raced. Hamilton, the same last name as the railroad executive who had hidden the bonds. Could it be a coincidence, or was this another trap? Against every instinct, Melissa opened the door. Thank you. Eleanor stepped inside, her eyes going immediately to the sleeping children. Her face softened at the sight of them. Don't! Melissa warned, moving to stand between the woman and her children. Eleanor raised her hands in a placating gesture. I have 4 grandchildren. I understand the instinct to protect. She sat in the chair by the window, deliberately positioning herself away from both the door and the sleeping children. Agent Brennan is from a different division. They believe in aggressive solutions. I prefer truth. What truth? Melissa remained standing, poised to grab her children and run if necessary. That Richard Hamilton wasn't a thief. Eleanor's voice dropped lower. He was a whistleblower who discovered that someone very powerful was using railroad reconstruction funds to finance illegal operations. The bonds in that station, they're evidence. Richard hid them there because he knew he was going to die. Melissa sank onto the edge of the bed. Why should I believe you? Eleanor pulled out a photograph from her purse. Old, faded. It showed a young woman standing next to a man in his 40s, both in hiking gear on what looked like a coastal trail. Because Richard Hamilton was my brother. Eleanor's voice caught slightly. And I've spent 30 years trying to prove he died protecting something important. Melissa studied the photograph. The woman was clearly a younger Eleanor. The man had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, nothing like what Melissa would expect from someone embezzling millions. Eleanor leaned forward. Those bonds have serial numbers. Each one traces back to a specific transaction. Together, they're a roadmap of corruption that goes to the very top. That's why Brennan wants them buried. That's why they killed my brother. They'll kill me too. The reality of her situation crashed down on Melissa like a physical weight. Not if we're smart. Eleanor stood, her posture straightening with resolve. Tomorrow when Brennan comes, don't sign anything. Demand lawyers. Make noise. Be difficult. Buy us time. Time for what? To make copies of every serial number. To contact journalists who can't be bought. To ensure that if something happens to you, the truth still gets out. She moved to the door, then paused, looking back at the sleeping children. Your children deserve a mother who fights for what's right, even when it's dangerous. After Eleanor left, Melissa sat in the dark watching her children sleep. Lucas's chest rose and fell with each breath, his teddy bear clutched tight. Sophia had one arm flung protectively across her little brother. Nathan slept on the edge, his body positioned, as if ready to leap up and defend. Melissa thought about the easy path. Sign the papers, take the money, run. $10,000 would rent an apartment for a few months, enough time to find a job, restart. The safe choice, the mother's choice. But she also thought about Richard Hamilton, who had hidden those bonds, who had died trying to expose the truth. About Eleanor, who had spent 3 decades seeking justice for her brother. About a system so corrupt it would threaten a homeless mother and her children rather than face exposure. If she ran now, what would she be teaching her children? That the powerful always win. That truth doesn't matter when your back is against the wall. That courage is a luxury for those with nothing to lose. The next morning, she drove her children to her sister's house 2 hours away. Just for a few days, she told them, though Nathan's eyes said he knew better. Her sister asked questions Melissa couldn't answer, but took the children in without hesitation, promising to keep them safe until Melissa sorted things out. Then she returned to the station. Brennan was already there, flanked by 4 agents in identical dark suits. He smiled when he saw her, the confident smile of a man who never lost. Have you made your decision? He held out a pen. Melissa pulled out her phone. I've photographed every bond, every serial number. Copies are with attorneys in 3 different cities. If anything happens to me or my children, everything goes public. Brennan's jaw tightened, the only sign that she'd surprised him. You have no idea what you're playing with. Then explain it to me. She stepped forward, courage born of desperation. Tell me why Richard Hamilton had to die. Tell me whose names are on those transaction records. This is a matter of national security. Brennan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. This is a matter of theft and murder. Melissa interrupted. And I own this building now. Those bonds were abandoned here. Legally, they're mine. We'll see what a judge says about that. Yes, Melissa smiled coldly. We will. In open court, with reporters present. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by the serial numbers. Brennan stepped close enough that she could smell his aftershave. People who push too hard sometimes push themselves right off cliffs, just like Hamilton. Is that a threat, Agent Brennan? It's a history lesson. That night, Melissa didn't leave the station. She couldn't go back to her children until this was resolved. She wouldn't lead danger to their door. Instead, she sat in the main hall with a camping lantern going through the boxes she'd brought up from the basement. Each bond told a story. Money allocated for railway improvements that never happened. Contracts with companies that existed only on paper. Payments to individuals who died in accidents shortly after. Around midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Parker. A man's voice. Nervous. Young. My name is Christopher Sullivan. I'm a Senate aide. Director Hamilton gave me your number. I'm listening. Melissa kept her voice neutral, uncertain if this was another trap. Those bonds. One of the serial numbers matches a payment authorized by Senator William Crawford. He's my boss. Christopher paused. Was my boss. I've been collecting evidence of his involvement in illegal funding operations. Melissa's pulse quickened. Crawford. The name had appeared on several of the bonds she'd examined. Senator William Crawford. He's running for president, which is why this has to come out now. Before he gets that kind of power. Another pause. I can get you documents, testimony, but I need protection. I can't protect anyone. Melissa laughed bitterly. I can barely protect myself. You have the bonds, physical evidence. That's more than anyone has had in 30 years. His voice cracked. Please, my conscience can't take any more. Melissa closed her eyes. She thought of her children safe at her sister's house, thought of Richard Hamilton dying alone on a cliff, thought of all the secrets buried in bureaucracy and blood. Okay, she said, let's bring them all down. The war began at dawn. Melissa woke to the sound of engines, multiple vehicles surrounding the station. Through a crack in the boarded windows, she saw local police, federal agents, and news vans. Someone had leaked. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Get to the basement now. Melissa grabbed the boxes of bonds she'd brought upstairs and ran for the basement stairs. In the vast underground space, she found Eleanor and two others, a young man in a rumpled suit who must be Christopher Sullivan, and a woman with a camera. Meredith Cole, the woman said. Washington Post. Director Hamilton filled me in. They're going to raid. Melissa set down the boxes, her voice urgent. Let them. Eleanor smiled grimly. Christopher brought something interesting. Sullivan handed Melissa a folder. Inside were bank statements, emails, transcripts. 15 years of evidence. Senator Crawford has been using railroad subsidies to fund private military contractors, off-books operations, and personal enrichment. The bonds Richard hid, they were meant to be destroyed, but he kept them as insurance. And it got him killed. Melissa felt the weight of Richard Hamilton's final desperate act. But not silenced, Eleanor added. Not anymore. Heavy footsteps echoed above. Someone was breaking down the door. Federal agents. We have a warrant. Meredith raised her camera. This is going live. Whatever happens, the world will see. The agents descended like an avalanche. Brennan led them, face twisted with fury when he saw the camera. Turn that off. First Amendment Agent Brennan, Meredith said calmly, unless you want tomorrow's headline to be Federal Agents Assault Journalist. Brennan turned to Melissa. You're under arrest for possession of stolen property. Actually, a new voice said from the stairs. She's not. Everyone turned. A woman in a judge's robes descended the staircase flanked by federal marshals. Judge Victoria Crawford, she announced. Emergency injunction. This property and everything in it is under court protection pending a full investigation. She looked at Brennan, her gaze unflinching. Agent, you're relieved of duty pending an internal review. Brennan's face went white. You can't. I can. Marshal, please escort Agent Brennan from the premises. As Brennan was led away, Judge Crawford approached Melissa. Eleanor called in every favor she had. You've got a week to document everything before official proceedings begin. Melissa's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me. Judge Crawford's eyes held a mix of sadness and determination. Thank Richard Hamilton. His sacrifice is finally going to mean something. The next 7 days blurred together. Journalists, investigators, and prosecutors descended on the station. Each bond was cataloged, its serial number traced to specific government transactions spanning decades. The web of corruption spread wider than anyone imagined. 3 senators, a dozen officials, hundreds of millions stolen. Melissa barely slept, sustained by coffee and determination. She gave depositions, provided evidence, watched as powerful men were led away in handcuffs. She learned the full story of Richard Hamilton, how he had discovered discrepancies in the railroad's books, how he had been warned to stay silent, how he had chosen to gather evidence instead. On the 7th night, she stood in the main hall with Eleanor and Christopher. The station buzzed with activity, lawyers, reporters, federal investigators, doing the work that should have been done 30 years ago. Richard would be proud, Eleanor said softly, watching the proceedings. Melissa thought of the man who'd hidden those bonds, who died believing truth was worth more than life. He saved them all, the evidence. It just took a while to find the right person to discover it. A desperate mother, Eleanor smiled. They never saw you coming. What happens now? Melissa asked suddenly, aware that she hadn't thought beyond survival. Trials, convictions, justice. Finally, Eleanor paused. And you? The government will likely claim the bonds, but there's a whistleblower reward, percentage of recovered funds. It'll be enough to give your children the life they deserve. Melissa looked around the station. Her station. I want to keep this place. Turn it into something meaningful. A museum, Christopher suggested. A community center. Melissa's vision clarified as she spoke. Where secrets don't hide in basements. Where people who need help can find it. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Richard would have loved that. That night, for the first time since discovering the bonds, Melissa slept peacefully on a cot in the station master's office. In her dreams, she saw the station transformed. Windows, repaired walls, freshly painted, children playing in rooms that had held darkness for decades. A place of new beginnings built on the foundation of an old truth that one person's courage could derail decades of corruption. In the morning, she would call her sister, tell the children they were coming home, their real home. And together they would build something that would last longer than secrets, stronger than fear. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is someone with nothing left to lose. And sometimes that's exactly what justice needs. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of the station, casting long shadows across the main hall. Melissa's phone vibrated with a text from her sister. The children were safe, asking for her, worried. She had promised to be back soon, but soon was becoming a concept as fluid as the dust motes dancing in the light beams. The station that had started as desperate shelter had transformed overnight into the epicenter of what reporters were already calling the bond scandal of the century. Eleanor arrived with coffee and a newspaper tucked under her arm. The headline screamed across the front page: Railroad bonds uncover decades of corruption. Senator Crawford under investigation. Below that, a grainy photo of Melissa standing in the station doorway, looking both defiant and frightened. "You're famous." Eleanor slid the coffee across a makeshift table of stacked crates. "I never wanted fame." Melissa scanned the article, noting how they'd portrayed her. Single mother of 3, discovers corruption worth hundreds of millions. They'd made her sound heroic rather than desperate, decisive rather than cornered. The public never sees the terror behind bravery, only its results. Eleanor nodded toward the basement door. "The forensics team is almost done cataloging the bonds. They've confirmed the first 10 lockers contain approximately 110 million in bearer bonds, all traced to government contracts between 1975 and 1978. A slender man in a rumpled suit emerged from the stairwell, clutching a leather portfolio. Christopher Sullivan looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red-rimmed behind wireframe glasses. "The Senate Ethics Committee has called an emergency session. Crawford's claiming national security privilege to avoid testifying." "Of course he is," Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Standard playbook. Classify everything, deny access, delay until public interest wanes." The Washington Post is running a follow-up tomorrow. Rachel Martinez is analyzing the bond serial numbers against Treasury records. Christopher hesitated, lowering his voice. "But there's something else. Something that doesn't make sense. These bonds weren't just siphoning money from railroad subsidies. Some of them matched black budget allocations for intelligence operations in South America, operations that officially never existed." The air in the station suddenly felt heavier. Melissa remembered Brennan's words, "A matter of national security." Not just corruption then, government secrets, the kind people killed to protect. A commotion at the main entrance drew their attention. 2 federal marshals were escorting a woman through the doorway. Judge Crawford today, in a business suit rather than robes, her face grave. "We have a problem." The judge didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Someone broke into the evidence room at the federal building last night. The boxes you documented yesterday are gone." Eleanor stiffened. "That's impossible. Those bonds were under 24-hour guard." "Apparently the guard was called away, an emergency that conveniently never happened." Judge Crawford's eyes were steel. "They're getting desperate." Melissa felt a chill creep up her spine. The boxes stolen were only copies, catalog duplicates of the originals still hidden in the lockers. But the theft revealed how far their opponents would go. Christopher paled. If they're willing to steal evidence from a federal building, they were willing to do much worse. Eleanor finished the thought. "We need to accelerate our timeline." Judge Crawford nodded. "I've issued sealed indictments for 3 senators, including Crawford, and 5 Treasury officials. They'll be served simultaneously tomorrow morning. Until then, we need to secure the original bonds and any other evidence." Melissa's phone vibrated again. Another text from her sister. Lucas was asking when Mommy was coming home. His heart checkup was tomorrow. Reality crashed back. She was still a mother first, whistleblower second. Her children needed her, but leaving now felt like abandoning a mission half completed. "I need to see my kids." Melissa's voice broke slightly. "Lucas has a doctor's appointment tomorrow." Eleanor and the judge exchanged glances. "Go, the station is under federal protection now. We'll continue processing the evidence." But Christopher looked unconvinced. "They broke into a federal building. What's to stop them from following you to your sister's?" The thought had already occurred to Melissa, sending ice through her veins. "I won't lead them to my children. I have a solution." Judge Crawford pulled out her phone. "I have a federal safe house 30 miles from here. We can bring your children there, under marshal protection, until the indictments are served." 2 hours later, a nondescript sedan with federal plates delivered Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas to the station. Lucas ran to Melissa, flinging himself into her arms with such force she nearly toppled backward. His small body trembled against hers, his face buried in her neck. "I thought the bad men took you away." His whisper carried the weight of childish nightmares mingled with all too real fears. Nathan hung back eyes cataloging the changes to the station. The evidence markers, the federal agents, the computers and equipment that had transformed their castle into a command center. Always watchful, always calculating, her oldest had the preternatural awareness of a child who'd learned too early that adults could disappear. Are we in trouble? Nathan's question contained multitudes. Are we homeless again? Are we safe? Have you done something wrong? No, sweetheart. Melissa drew him close, feeling the resistance in his adolescent frame before he relented. We're helping some important people find the truth. Sophia had already befriended a young federal agent, chattering about how they were going to live in a castle, and did the agent want to see where her room would be. The agent played along, but her eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, hand never straying far from her weapon. They left for the safe house before sunset, a convoy of 3 vehicles taking different routes, changing cars at a shopping mall parking garage. The choreography of it felt surreal to Melissa, like something from a spy movie, rather than the life of a former project manager who just wanted a roof over her children's heads. The safe house was a modest ranch-style home in a quiet suburb, indistinguishable from its neighbors, except for the subtle security features. Reinforced doors, window sensors, cameras, disguised as outdoor lighting. Inside, it was surprisingly homey. Stocked refrigerator, toys, and books for the children, 3 bedrooms with fresh linens. 2 marshals would remain on site with others patrolling the perimeter. The children, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep quickly. All 3 piled into the master bedroom despite the available space. They'd grown used to sleeping close during their time in the van, finding security in each other's presence. Melissa sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor and Christopher, the low light casting long shadows across their faces. On the table between them lay Christopher's evidence, internal memos, financial records, transcripts of conversations spanning 15 years, all pointing to Senator Crawford's involvement in a complex scheme of financial manipulation. Crawford was on the Transportation Committee in 1978. Christopher spread out the documents like playing cards. He directed federal funds to railroad infrastructure projects that never materialized. The money disappeared into shell companies, then reappeared as funding for classified operations in Nicaragua, Chile, Colombia. Operations Congress never approved. Eleanor's finger traced a paper trail through dummy corporations and offshore accounts. Richard found the discrepancies in the railroad's books. Money allocated for track repairs, station renovations, safety upgrades, millions that vanished. He tried to report it through proper channels. Christopher pulled out a chain of internal memos, but Crawford had friends at Treasury, at Justice. Every investigation got buried, so he kept the evidence. Melissa felt a growing connection to Richard Hamilton, this man she'd never met, whose moral choice now dictated her life's path. When he knew they were coming for him, he hid the bonds where only someone desperate or determined would find them. Someone like you. Eleanor's smile held a mixture of sadness and pride. He always said the truth finds its messenger. Melissa's phone lit up with an incoming call, Rachel Martinez from the Washington Post. Rachel's voice came through tense, urgent. You need to turn on the news. Crawford is holding a press conference. The television flickered to life. Senator William Crawford stood at a podium, American flags flanking him, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and trustworthiness. His expression was grave concern, the face of a statesman addressing a national crisis. Today I've been informed of a troubling discovery at an abandoned train station in Santa Rosa. Evidence suggests that a significant quantity of financial instruments, originally reported stolen in 1978, has been recovered. Crawford's voice resonated with practiced sincerity. What's most disturbing is that these bonds appear to have been altered to implicate innocent public servants in wrongdoing that never occurred. Christopher's face drained of color. He's getting ahead of the story, controlling the narrative. Crawford continued, his expression hardening. This is nothing less than a sophisticated attempt to undermine faith in our institutions, possibly orchestrated by foreign actors. I've called for a complete investigation into this fraud, and I urge the public to reserve judgment until all facts are known. He's turning it around. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around her coffee mug, making himself the victim. The camera cut to a reporter asking a question. Senator sources claim that some of these bonds directly traced to projects you oversaw on the Transportation Committee. Crawford's expression shifted to practiced indignation. Those allegations come from a discredited former employee with a documented history of mental health issues. His gaze bored directly into the camera. And let's be clear about the so-called whistleblower at the center of this. A homeless woman with 3 children, no job, and a history of financial problems who suddenly discovers $200 million. The public deserves better than such obvious fabrications. The character assassination hit Melissa like a physical blow. She'd expected legal challenges, procedural obstacles, not a public dismantling of her credibility, her worth. Eleanor switched off the television. This changes nothing. The evidence speaks for itself. But Christopher looked unconvinced. He just poisoned the well. Every media outlet will lead with his statement. By morning, half the country will believe this is a hoax. Then we need something he can't spin. Melissa's mind raced, her project management skills clicking into gear. The bonds are physical evidence, but he's claiming they're altered. We need something digital, something with timestamps that proves when the transactions occurred. Christopher's expression changed. The banking records. Crawford's staffers were careful about paper trails, but electronic banking was new in the early 80s. They wouldn't have known how to cover those tracks as thoroughly. Can you access them? Eleanor leaned forward. Christopher hesitated. My clearance was revoked when I resigned, but I know someone who might help. Someone who owes me a favor. While Christopher made calls, Eleanor received an update from the forensics team at the station. They'd discovered something in locker 0012, not bonds, but a leather journal. Richard Hamilton's personal diary, documenting his growing suspicions and the evidence he'd gathered. The final entry was dated 2 days before his death. If anything happens to me, the bonds tell the whole story. E knows where to look. E. Eleanor. He'd left her a clue she hadn't recognized until now. 30 years of searching, and the answer had been encoded in the bonds all along. The night deepened. Melissa checked on the children, finding comfort in their peaceful breathing. Lucas's teddy bear had fallen to the floor. She tucked it back under his arm, brushing damp curls from his forehead. Tomorrow's appointment would assess his recovery from surgery, determine if he needed additional procedures. The ordinary concerns of motherhood felt surreal against the backdrop of national conspiracy. Christopher returned triumph in his eyes. I've got it. Treasury database archives, digital records from 1982-1988. The transition years when they first computerized the systems. His contact had sent encrypted files detailing electronic transfers that matched the bond serial numbers. Eleanor pored over the data. This proves the money moved through Crawford's committee and into those shell companies. It confirms everything Richard documented. But will it be enough? Melissa remembered Crawford's smooth denial, the ease with which he portrayed her as unstable and reliable. We need to make sure it reaches the right people before Crawford can interfere. Eleanor's expression was grim. Judge Crawford has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. The indictments will be unsealed, arrests made. If we can present this evidence, they'll get it into the official record before Crawford's people can suppress it. A sound from outside interrupted her, tires on gravel car doors closing quietly. The marshals moved instantly, weapons drawn, positioning themselves at windows and doors. One of them spoke into his radio, then relaxed slightly. Federal agents, they're showing Treasury badges, saying they need to speak with Ms. Parker about evidence tampering. Treasury and Eleanor's alarm was immediate. The only Treasury agents authorized for this operation would have called ahead. Those aren't legitimate. The front door splintered inward. Men in dark suits poured through weapons, raised shouting contradictory orders. The marshals responded. A brief chaotic exchange of gunfire erupted. Melissa grabbed the children, pulling them into the bathroom, the only interior room without windows, locking the flimsy door behind them. Nathan was fully awake, eyes wide with terror, but thinking clearly. He dragged the heavy vanity in front of the door, while Melissa huddled with Sophia and Lucas in the bathtub, covering their bodies with her own. Lucas sobbed against her chest. Sophia had gone terribly silent. The gunfire stopped. Footsteps approached the bathroom door. A voice called out, familiar, chilling. Mrs. Parker. Agent Brennan's tone was conversational, as if they were meeting for coffee. You're making this much harder than it needs to be. The door handle rattled against the lock. I just want the evidence, Mrs. Parker. No one needs to get hurt. The marshals, Melissa whispered the question, afraid of the answer. Taking a little nap. Brennan's voice hardened. You have 10 seconds to open this door before I break it down. Melissa looked around desperately. The bathroom had no escape routes, a tiny window too small for even Sophia to squeeze through, no other doors. Her phone had no signal. They'd been jamming communications. Nathan pointed to the ceiling. An access panel for plumbing may be large enough for the children. Melissa boosted him up, straining under his weight. He pushed the panel aside and pulled himself into the dark space above. "Help your sister." Melissa lifted Sophia next, watching as Nathan's hands reached down to pull her into the ceiling crawl space. Only Lucas remained, his eyes huge with fear. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. The vanity skidded an inch across the tile floor. Melissa kissed Lucas's forehead. "Be very quiet up there. Don't come down no matter what you hear." She lifted him as high as she could. Nathan and Sophia reached down, grabbing his arms and hauling him upward just as another slam hit the door, the vanity sliding further. "I know what you're doing, Mrs. Parker." Brennan's voice carried a smile. "It won't help. We'll find them eventually." Melissa backed against the far wall as the door finally gave way, the vanity toppling forward. Brennan stepped over it, surprisingly calm, straightening his tie as if entering a business meeting. Two men flanked him, their weapons trained on Melissa. The children, but Brennan glanced around the empty bathroom. "Gone." Melissa met his gaze with defiance she didn't entirely feel. "And safe from you." Brennan sighed as if disappointed in a student's poor test performance. Always making things difficult. He nodded to his men. "Find them." As the men left, Brennan enclosed the broken door as best he could, creating an illusion of privacy. "You know what I want, Mrs. Parker? The evidence. All of it. Crawford isn't the type to leave loose ends." "You mean like Richard Hamilton?" The accusation slipped out before she could stop herself. Brennan didn't deny it. That was unfortunate, but necessary. National security requires hard choices. The diary, the banking records, Christopher's evidence. It's all at the station. Melissa tried to sound convincing, needing to keep his attention away from the children. Brennan studied her, head tilted like a predator assessing prey. "You're lying, but it doesn't matter. My men are at the station too. Whatever evidence exists will be gone by morning." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "This ends tonight." A crash sounded from somewhere in the house, followed by shouting. Brennan's radio crackled to life. "Sir, we've got company. Federal agents, real ones, lots of them." Brennan's composure slipped for the first time. "How?" He grabbed Melissa's arm, pulling her roughly toward the door. "You're coming with me." He dragged her through the house, past the unconscious forms of the marshals. Not dead, she noted with relief, their chests still rising and falling. Outside, red and blue lights painted the darkness, sirens wailing in the distance. A helicopter roared overhead, its spotlight sweeping across the yard. Brennan pulled Melissa toward a black SUV, using her as a shield against the federal agents establishing a perimeter around the property. His arm locked around her throat tight enough to restrict her breathing. "Let her go, Brennan." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. "It's over." She stood by a police cruiser illuminated in the headlights. Beside her was Judge Crawford, and behind them a phalanx of FBI agents in tactical gear. Brennan's grip tightened. "It's not over until I say it's over." His voice carried the dangerous edge of a man with nothing left to lose. "Back off or she dies right here." The helicopter spotlight found them, bathing them in harsh white light. Melissa squinted against the glare, trying to assess her options. Brennan was using her as a human shield, but his attention was divided between Eleanor and the approaching agents. His grip on her throat had loosened slightly as he reached for his weapon. Melissa remembered a self-defense class from years ago taken after her divorce, when she'd briefly feared her ex-husband's temper. The instructor's voice echoed in her memory. "If someone grabs you from behind, drop your weight. Become dead weight. Then strike at vulnerable areas, groin instep eyes." She let her knees buckle, dropping suddenly. Brennan, surprised by the shift, loosened his grip for just a moment. Melissa drove her elbow backward with all her strength, connecting with his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping. She twisted away, falling to the ground and rolling clear as agents swarmed forward, tackling Brennan. Eleanor was beside her, instantly helping her to her feet. "My children," Melissa gasped. "They're hiding in the ceiling." Agents rushed into the house. Minutes later, they emerged with Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas, all wide-eyed but unharmed. Lucas broke free from the agent, carrying him, running to Melissa and wrapping his arms around her legs with crushing force. Nathan followed more slowly, his expression a mix of relief and lingering terror. "You fought back," his voice carried a hint of wonder. "I had to. You were counting on me." Melissa pulled him close, feeling the resistance of early adolescence melt as he allowed himself, just for a moment, to be a child again. Sophia was the last to reach them, her small face solemn. "Did you catch the bad guys?" Eleanor knelt to her level. "We caught some of them, and we're going to catch the rest very soon." The safe house was compromised. Judge Crawford directed them to a convoy of vehicles waiting to transport them to a secured federal building. As they prepared to leave, Melissa caught sight of Brennan being placed in a police cruiser, his expression cold and calculating, even in defeat. This isn't over, she realized. Brennan was just one operative. Senator Crawford was still free, still powerful, still dangerous. And somewhere in the darkness, other men like Brennan waited ready to protect secrets at any cost. The federal building buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Judge Crawford had commandeered a conference room, transforming it into a war room. Evidence from the station was being delivered under heavy guard. The remaining bonds, Richard Hamilton's diary, Christopher's documentation. Combined with the Treasury database records, they formed an irrefutable case. Christopher entered his expression triumphant. Rachel's story just went live. Front page of the Washington Post website, breaking across all major networks. Treasury conspiracy, decades of corruption exposed. She included everything. The bonds, Crawford's involvement, the attack on the safe house. Eleanor's phone rang. Her face tightened as she listened. "Thank you, we'll be ready." She ended the call, turning to the judge. "That was my contact at FBI. They tried to serve the arrest warrant for Senator Crawford. He's gone. Private jet departed for a non-extradition country 30 minutes ago." Judge Crawford's expression hardened. "Put out an international alert. Freeze his accounts. I want every airport, seaport, and border crossing on high alert." But Melissa felt a chill of certainty. He's not running. A man like Crawford, with his ego, his ambition, he wouldn't abandon his power, his presidential aspirations without a fight. Then what Eleanor asked. He's regrouping, planning a countermove. Melissa had seen this pattern in corporate politics. When backed into a corner, the most dangerous players didn't flee. They attacked. As if confirming her suspicion, all phones in the room began buzzing simultaneously with news alerts. On a nearby monitor, a breaking news banner appeared. Senator Crawford calls evidence fabricated, announces press conference to reveal the truth at 9 a.m. He's going to try to discredit everything. Christopher's voice was hollow, and he still has allies in powerful positions. Then we need to be ready. Judge Crawford's voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. "Ms. Parker, are you prepared to testify publicly, to tell your story to the world?" Melissa thought of her children, of the risks of what public exposure would mean. Of Lucas's medical needs, of Nathan's hard-won stability, of Sophia's innocence. She thought of the easy path, anonymity, safety, silence. Then she thought of Richard Hamilton, who had died rather than stay silent. Of Eleanor, who had spent 30 years seeking justice for her brother. Of the truth buried for decades that had literally fallen into her hands. "I'll testify." The words came more easily than she expected. The world needs to hear what happened. The night passed in a blur of preparation. Melissa recorded her formal statement, walked through her testimony with federal prosecutors, reviewed evidence with forensic accountants. Eleanor remained by her side, a steady presence, as the machinery of justice ground into motion around them. The children slept in a makeshift bedroom, a converted office with cots brought in by sympathetic staff. Nathan had resisted at first, insisting on staying awake, on knowing everything that was happening. But exhaustion had finally claimed him, and he slept now beside his siblings, one arm protectively draped over Lucas. As dawn broke, Melissa stood at a window overlooking the city, watching the first light paint the buildings gold. In a few hours, she would stand before the world and challenge a powerful senator, expose decades of corruption, put herself and her family in the spotlight. The thought terrified her. Eleanor joined her at the window. "It's okay to be afraid," she said quietly. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do despite it." Melissa thought about the train station, her station, waiting for her return. About the possibilities it held, the future she might build there if she survived the coming storm. A community center rising from corruption's ashes, helping families like hers find their footing again. They're setting up for Crawford's press conference. Christopher entered, tablet in hand, showing a live feed of a hotel ballroom being prepared with podium flags and press seating. He's going all out. National networks, international press. He's playing to the biggest audience possible. So will we. Judge Crawford joined them, impeccable despite the sleepless night. "The Attorney General has authorized me to convene a special public hearing immediately following Crawford's press conference. Same networks, same audience, but with all our evidence on full display." The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Melissa sat with her children, trying to explain in terms they could understand what was happening, what would happen. Lucas clung to her, still shaken from the night before. Sophia asked 100 questions, her natural curiosity reasserting itself. Nathan said little, but his eyes registered everything, processing, calculating. You're going to be on TV. Sophia's eyes widened. A little bit, yes? Melissa smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. I have to tell people about what we found in the train station. About the treasure. Lucas perked up. His concept of bearer bonds was firmly rooted in pirate stories. Something like that. Melissa smiled despite her anxiety, and about the brave man who hid it there. Is it dangerous? Nathan finally spoke, cutting to the heart of the matter. His eyes, too old for his 12 years, searched hers for the truth. Melissa considered lying, offering reassurance. But Nathan deserved better. There are powerful people who don't want the truth to come out. But we have powerful friends too. And sometimes doing the right thing is worth the risk. Nathan nodded slowly, accepting her answer with the gravity of someone far older. Then we should do it. At precisely 9 a.m., Senator William Crawford approached the podium, silver hair gleaming under television lights, American flags arranged behind him. His expression combined righteous indignation with statesman-like concern as he addressed the nation. My fellow Americans, I come before you today to address a coordinated attack on our democratic institutions. In recent days, a series of false allegations have been made against me and other public servants. Allegations based on fraudulent evidence and perpetrated by individuals with clear political motives. In the federal building, Melissa watched the broadcast with Eleanor Christopher and Judge Crawford, all too aware that in 1 hour she would face those same cameras, that same national audience. Crawford continued, his voice resonant with practiced sincerity. The bearer bonds allegedly found in Santa Rosa have been examined by independent experts who confirm they show signs of recent alteration. The signatures, the serial numbers, all manipulated to implicate innocent individuals. A blatant lie, but delivered with such conviction that even Melissa felt a moment of doubt. Crawford was a master performer, a politician who had spent decades honing his ability to reshape truth. But he wasn't finished. The most disturbing aspect of this affair is the involvement of rogue elements within our own government agencies. Individuals who have pursued personal vendettas against political figures under the guise of investigation. On screen, Crawford held up a folder. I have here documentation proving that Eleanor Hamilton, the so-called task force director, has been obsessed with discrediting me for decades, ever since her brother's suicide. Richard Hamilton embezzled millions before taking his own life, and his sister has spent 30 years trying to rewrite history to absolve him. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. He's trying to make it personal, to discredit me so the evidence loses credibility. Crawford's expression softened to one of compassionate concern. As for Melissa Parker, the single mother who allegedly discovered these bonds, I feel only sympathy. A woman desperate to provide for her children, manipulated by those with political agendas into participating in this fraud. I've directed my staff to establish a support fund for her family to ensure those children receive the care they need once this charade concludes. The calculated kindness was more devastating than any attack. Crawford had positioned himself as her benefactor, making any testimony against him appear as ingratitude or manipulation. When the press conference ended, Melissa felt hollow. Crawford had been masterful, weaving truth and lies so seamlessly that separating them seemed impossible. Would anyone believe her word against his? It's time. Judge Crawford stood, straightening her robes. Ms. Parker, are you ready? The courtroom was packed. Journalists, government officials, curious public. Television cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting the proceedings nationally. Melissa sat at the witness table, hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Beside her, federal prosecutors arranged evidence displays. The bonds, Richard Hamilton's diary bank records, transaction logs. Across the room, a team of lawyers represented Senator Crawford, who had declined to appear personally. His absence was a calculated move, allowing his legal team to challenge the proceedings while he maintained dignified distance. Judge Crawford calls the hearing to order, her voice cutting through the murmurs and camera clicks. Today we address allegations of financial fraud, misappropriation of government funds, and obstruction of justice spanning more than 4 decades. The prosecuting attorney began methodically presenting evidence, explaining the bonds, their origins, the altered railroad budgets, the misappropriated funds. Forensic accountants testified about transaction patterns. Christopher presented his documentation of Crawford's more recent financial manipulations. Then came Eleanor's testimony, precise, detailed, emotional, only when she spoke of her brother's death. She walked through the timeline, the evidence Richard had gathered, the patterns he had identified. She acknowledged her decades-long search for justice without apology or defensiveness. When it was Melissa's turn, she approached the witness stand with legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. The cameras felt predatory, the eyes of the nation evaluating, judging. She told her story simply: the foreclosure, purchasing the station, discovering the bonds, being threatened by Brennan, learning the truth from Eleanor, the attack at the safe house. Crawford's lawyers cross-examined her, aggressively questioning her motives, her understanding of the evidence, her relationship with Eleanor. They implied desperation had led her to participate in fraud, that she had been manipulated by Eleanor's vendetta. When you purchased this abandoned train station, Ms. Parker, what exactly were you hoping to find? The lead attorney's tone suggested the answer was obvious. Treasure, a way out of poverty, a miracle. Melissa met his gaze steadily. A roof, four walls. Somewhere my children wouldn't have to sleep in a minivan through winter. I wasn't looking for millions in bearer bonds or government conspiracies. I was looking for shelter. The simplicity of her answer seemed to catch the lawyer off guard. He shifted tactics, growing more aggressive. Yet you expect this court to believe that you, with no financial background, no legal training, immediately recognize these bonds as evidence of corruption, rather than simply taking them for yourself. Melissa thought about the moment in the basement, the flashlight illuminating those ornate certificates. The immediacy of recognition had nothing to do with financial expertise. I recognized them as something that didn't belong to me. And when federal agents threatened my children to get them back, I knew they were something important, something worth protecting. The rest I learned from Eleanor, from Christopher, from the evidence itself. As the questioning continued, Judge Crawford received a note from a court officer. Her expression changed as she read it. Then she called for a 10-minute recess, summoning the attorneys to her chambers. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted tangibly. The judge addressed the room, her voice carrying new urgency. This court has just received information that Senator William Crawford has departed on a private aircraft for Caracas, Venezuela, despite a federal order restricting his travel. His passport has been flagged, international authorities notified. The courtroom erupted in whispers and exclamations. Crawford's lawyers looked genuinely shocked. They hadn't been informed of their client's plans. Judge Crawford continued, silencing the room with a raised hand. Additionally, federal agents executing a search warrant at Senator Crawford's residence have discovered documentation directly linking him to the death of Richard Hamilton in 1978, as well as the journalist who was investigating Hamilton's allegations. These documents include payment records to former intelligence operatives and detailed plans for what was described as an unfortunate accident on Highway 1. Eleanor's composure finally broke. After 40 years, vindication had come for her brother. Tears streamed down her face as decades of doubt and suspicion crystallized into confirmed truth. In light of this new evidence, Judge Crawford's voice cut through the commotion. This court finds sufficient cause to issue warrants for the arrest of William Crawford on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, misappropriation of government funds, obstruction of justice, and flight to avoid prosecution. She looked directly into the cameras. Senator Crawford, if you are watching these proceedings, I strongly advise you to return voluntarily and surrender to federal authorities. There is nowhere on this earth beyond the reach of justice, not for crimes of this magnitude. The hearing concluded in a whirlwind of activity, journalists rushing to file updated stories, prosecutors conferring on next steps, federal agents coordinating with international law enforcement to track Crawford's flight. Amid the chaos, Melissa found herself standing with Eleanor and Christopher in a quiet corner of the courtroom. The three of them, strangers just days ago, now bound by shared danger and shared purpose. What happens now? Melissa asked, suddenly uncertain of her place in this unfolding drama. Eleanor smiled, the weight of 30 years visibly lifting from her shoulders. Now justice takes its course. Crawford will be found, arrested, tried. Others involved will face similar consequences. The truth Richard died for will finally be known. And the station, Melissa couldn't help asking. Her mind kept returning to those brick walls, that vast space, the possibility it represented. It's yours. Eleanor squeezed her hand. The bonds will be reclaimed by the government, but as the whistleblower who exposed this conspiracy, you're entitled to a percentage. Between that and what the government will pay to purchase the evidence, you'll have more than enough to renovate, to build your community center. Christopher nodded in agreement. Crawford's assets will be frozen, eventually seized. Poetic justice, his money funding the very community projects he once stole from. Outside the courthouse, a throng of reporters waited. Melissa hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of how this moment would change everything. Once she stepped outside, she would never again be anonymous. Her face, her name, her story would belong to the public narrative. "Ready?" Eleanor asked gently. Melissa thought of her children waiting at the federal building of the station, waiting for transformation of Richard Hamilton, who had hidden truth in darkness, knowing someday someone would bring it to light. "As ready as I'll ever be." She pushed open the door, stepping into the flash of cameras in the future that awaited beyond. 6 months passed with the grinding slowness of justice and the breathless speed of transformation. The train station that had once been Melissa's desperate gamble now hummed with the sounds of construction. Power tools cutting through century-old wood scaffolding, creaking against brick walls, workers calling to each other across the vast space. What had been derelict was becoming something new, something purposeful, something hopeful. Melissa stood on the newly rebuilt platform, blueprints unfurled in her hands, watching as workers installed large windows where broken brick had been. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, painting golden rectangles across the floor that had once been covered in decades of dust. Behind her, Nathan was deep in conversation with the electrical contractor, asking detailed questions about voltage and circuit breakers with the intensity only a 12-year-old could muster for such topics. The legal battles continued in Washington and beyond. Senator Crawford remained in Venezuela fighting extradition through an army of international lawyers. His assets in the United States had been frozen, his political allies scattering like rats from a sinking ship. 3 other senators had resigned in disgrace. 7 Treasury officials faced criminal charges. Agent Brennan had turned state's evidence revealing a decades-long conspiracy that stretched from Capitol Hill to Langley. But here in Santa Rosa, life moved forward. The whistleblower reward, 15% of recovered funds, had transformed Melissa's financial reality. From homeless to millionaire in 6 months, the newspapers called it. They missed the point entirely. The money wasn't freedom, it was responsibility. Every dollar represented Richard Hamilton's sacrifice, Eleanor's perseverance, the trust of a community that now looked to this building as a symbol of something larger than itself. Mrs. Parker, the architect, approached, tablet in hand, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning light. "We found something unusual in the East Wing. Could you come take a look?" Melissa followed him through what had once been the ticket hall, now partitioned with temporary walls marking future classrooms, counseling spaces, community areas. The renovation had revealed the station's hidden bones. Intricate moldings beneath layers of paint, mosaic floors under decades of grime, architectural details lost to time and neglect. In the East Wing, workers had removed a section of drywall to reveal an arched doorway sealed with brick and mortar sometime in the distant past. "It's not on any of the original blueprints," the architect explained. "We found it when testing for load-bearing capacity." Nathan appeared at her elbow, magnetized by the mystery. "Can we open it?" The construction foreman looked skeptical. "It's probably just an old storage space they sealed off during renovations in the 40s. Happens all the time in these historic buildings." But Melissa felt a familiar prickle at the base of her spine. The same sensation she'd experienced when finding the basement door months ago. "Let's open it." They brought in a mason to carefully remove the brick barrier. Behind it lay a narrow corridor, illuminated only by their flashlights, stretching perhaps 20 feet before ending at another door, this one made of heavy wood reinforced with iron bands. It could be dangerous. The foreman hesitated. Structure might not be sound. Nathan couldn't contain himself. "It's like a secret passage in a castle." The construction crew cleared the debris, tested the structural integrity, and finally pronounced it safe to explore. The wooden door at the corridor's end had no visible lock, only an iron handle worn smooth by hands long turned to dust. Melissa pulled, expecting resistance from decades of disuse, but the door swung open with surprising ease. Beyond lay a small room, perhaps 12 feet square, windowless and oddly preserved. Unlike the rest of the station, this space showed no signs of decay or vandalism. The walls were lined with bookshelves. A large oak desk dominated the center, its surface bare, except for a leather-bound journal and a tarnished brass key. The foreman whistled low and appreciative. "Looks like someone's private office, sealed up and forgotten." But why? Melissa approached the desk, drawn to the journal. The leather cover was unmarked, but when she carefully opened it, the first page revealed a name written in precise handwriting: "Property of Richard Hamilton, 1976-1978. Nathan peered over her shoulder. Another diary. A different one. Melissa carefully turned the pages. While the diary found in the locker had been Richard's official record of financial discrepancies, this journal contained something far more personal. His private thoughts, fears, suspicions. The early entries detailed his growing awareness of the financial irregularities, his initial attempts to report them through proper channels, his mounting frustration as his concerns were dismissed or buried. Then the entries grew darker. July 15, 19, Crawford called me to his office today. Said I was misinterpreting the discrepancies. Offered me a special bonus to focus on other aspects of the railroad's finances. Not even bothering to hide the bribe. September 3, 1977. Someone broke into my house last night. Nothing taken but my files were clearly searched. They're watching me now. December 12, 1977. Started moving the evidence to the station. The old storage lockers in the basement are perfect. Unused since the 30s, forgotten by everyone. If anything happens to me, the bonds will tell the story. The final entry, dated just one day before Richard Hamilton's fatal car accident. Sealed off the private office today. Left copies of everything, including what I haven't had time to document elsewhere. Eleanor will know what to do if the worst happens. Crawford's reach is longer than I imagined. God help anyone who gets in his way. Melissa closed the journal, hands trembling slightly. We need to call Eleanor. Eleanor arrived within hours, her silver hair windblown, from rushing her eyes wide as she took in the hidden office. She moved through the space with reverence, touching the bookshelves, the desk physical connections to the brother she had lost 4 decades earlier. He built himself a fortress. Eleanor's voice caught as she examined the room. Somewhere they couldn't monitor him, couldn't stop him from documenting what he'd found. The bookshelves contained financial textbooks, railroad operation manuals, and personal volumes. Poetry, philosophy, history. A life in literature frozen in 1978. But more importantly, they held additional evidence. Carbon copies of memos, photographed documents, handwritten notes detailing conversations and observations. An archive of corruption meticulously preserved. And the brass key, Melissa picked it up from the desk, feeling its weight in her palm. Eleanor examined it, recognition dawning slowly. It's for a safety deposit box. First National Bank of Santa Rosa. It's still there. I tried to access it after Richard died, but without the key and without being named on the account. Melissa made arrangements immediately. Construction paused evidence, secured federal investigators notified. By afternoon, she and Eleanor sat in a private room at the bank watching as the manager unlocked the box Richard Hamilton had rented in 1907. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax bearing the impression of a signet ring. Eleanor recognized it instantly. Our father's ring. Richard was the only one who kept it after he died. The bank manager discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with this final message from the past. Eleanor's hands shook as she carefully broke the seal, preserving it as best she could. Within the envelope, a single sheet of paper and a small key different from the safety deposit key, smaller, more intricate. The letter was brief, written in the same precise hand as the journal. LSL. If you're reading this, the worst has happened. The evidence is in the station. Bonds in the basement, lockers, documentation in my private office sealed behind the eastern archway. But there's more. The key enclosed opens a lockbox hidden in the third-floor records room behind the ventilation panel in the northwest corner. What's inside will explain everything. Why they're so desperate to hide these transactions, what the money is really funding. Be careful. This goes beyond Crawford, beyond the Treasury. They'll kill to keep this buried. All my love, Rich. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closed against tears. After all this time, the third floor. Melissa remembered the locked door at the top of the station staircase marked railroad personnel only. We still haven't accessed it. The structural engineers weren't sure about the floor's stability. They returned to the station as dusk fell, bringing with them a small team. Christopher Sullivan, whose testimony had been instrumental in the congressional investigations. Rachel Martinez, whose reporting had kept the scandal in the public eye. And 2 federal agents assigned to the ongoing case against Crawford and his co-conspirators. The third-floor door remained locked, and its heavy padlock rusted shut. One of the agents produced bolt cutters, snipping through metal, weakened by decades of exposure. The door groaned open, revealing a large open space filled with dust-covered filing cabinets, desks, and what appeared to be radio equipment from a bygone era. This was the operations center. Christopher ran his fingers over the old radio console, where they coordinated all train movement for the Western region. When they automated in the 70s, they just locked it up and walked away. The northwest corner. Eleanor moved with purpose, flashlight beam dancing across the walls until it found what she sought, a ventilation grate approximately 4 feet off the ground. The small key from the safety deposit box fit perfectly into a nearly invisible keyhole in the grate's corner. With a soft click, the entire panel swung outward, revealing a cavity in the wall. Rachel documented everything with her camera, preserving the moment for posterity. Within the wall cavity sat a metal lockbox roughly the size of a shoebox. Eleanor removed it with trembling hands, placing it carefully on a nearby desk. The box was locked, but the same key that had opened the ventilation panel worked here as well. Eleanor hesitated before lifting the lid as if suddenly afraid of what they might find. 40 years, she whispered. 40 years I've been looking for the truth. Inside the box lay several items: a small reel-to-reel tape recorder, 3 labeled tapes, a handwritten ledger, and a manila envelope containing photographs. The ledger contained names, dates, dollar amounts, all cross-referenced to specific bearer bond serial numbers. But it was the photographs that drew their collective breath. They showed Senator Crawford 40 years younger, but unmistakable, meeting with men whose faces Eleanor recognized all too well. Former intelligence officials, some who had later held cabinet positions. In one photo, they stood before a map of Central America regions, circled in red. In another, Crawford accepted a briefcase from a man identified in Richard's notes as a known arms dealer. The tapes, Christopher pointed to the small recorder. We need to hear what's on them. A technician was called, someone experienced in handling delicate historical recordings. While they waited, Eleanor and Melissa pored over the ledger, connecting the entries to the bonds they'd already cataloged. It wasn't just embezzlement. Eleanor's finger traced a column of figures. These transactions, they were funding black operations, regime changes, assassinations, operations Congress had explicitly prohibited. Crawford was the money man. Christopher examined the photographs. He made the financing invisible by routing it through railroad renovation projects that never happened. Perfect laundering mechanism. When the technician arrived, they gathered around as he carefully threaded the first tape into the recorder. The voice that emerged was Richard Hamilton's, younger, more confident than Melissa had imagined, but with the same precise diction evident in his written words. October 12, 1907, meeting with Director Stevens regarding discrepancies in the Redwood Pacific renovation allocations, recording made with their knowledge. What followed was a conversation between Richard and a man identified as Treasury Director Stevens, in which Richard methodically outlined the financial irregularities he discovered. Stevens' responses were dismissive, then threatening. Look, Hamilton, you're a numbers guy. You're good at your job, but you're stepping into matters beyond your clearance level. These allocations are classified. National security. The oversight committees have approved everything. The oversight committees were shown different numbers. I have the real allocations and the ones presented to Congress. They don't match. Who have you shared this with? No one yet. But if these discrepancies aren't addressed through proper channels, I'll have no choice but to elevate the matter. That would be a career-limiting move, Hamilton. Think about your future. Think about your sister. The second tape contained a recording of a meeting between Richard and Senator Crawford. The audio quality was poorer, suggesting the recording had been made covertly. Crawford was explicit about both the scheme and the consequences of exposure. These are extraordinary times, Hamilton. The Soviets are gaining ground in Latin America. Congress has tied our hands with their restrictions, their oversight. Sometimes patriotism requires operating in gray areas. Embezzling federal funds isn't a gray area, Senator. It's a felony. Don't be naive. These operations are essential to national security. History won't remember the accounting. It will remember whether we stood firm against communist expansion. I can't be part of this. You already are. The only question is whether you'll be the loyal soldier who understands necessary sacrifice or the traitor who undermines his country's interests. And traitors tend to meet unfortunate ends. The third tape was the most damning. A recording of Crawford discussing Richard Hamilton with someone identified only as the cleaner. Hamilton is becoming a problem. He's making copies of the bonds, documenting the transfers. If he goes public, the whole operation is compromised. Accidents can be arranged. The coastal highway has seen many tragedies. Make it clean, nothing that raises questions, and find whatever evidence he's accumulated, all of it. Understood. What about the sister there close? She's not involved. Leave her alone unless that changes. The room fell silent as the tape ended. Eleanor's face had gone ashen, her composure finally breaking at hearing the casual discussion of her brother's murder. Rachel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder while Christopher paced the dusty floor, running calculations in his mind. These recordings change everything. One of the federal agents broke the silence. We now have direct evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, not just financial crimes, and implicating a Treasury director and other officials. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder, but some of those men are still alive. Rachel's journalist mind immediately grasped the implications. Some held cabinet positions in multiple administrations after this. The ripple effects will be enormous. Richard knew. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. He knew they were going to kill him. That's why he hid everything in different locations. He was creating a dead man's switch. Melissa felt the weight of Richard Hamilton's final days. The fear, the isolation, the desperate attempt to preserve truth against overwhelming power. He'd hidden his evidence like a man scattering seeds, hoping at least one would take root and grow. And it had taken 40 years for that seed to find fertile ground. 40 years for a desperate mother seeking shelter to stumble upon the truth he'd died protecting. The randomness of it felt both miraculous and tragic. Dawn was breaking by the time they secured all the evidence and made the necessary notifications to federal authorities. As Melissa and Eleanor stood on the station platform, watching the sunrise, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. A woman emerged, mid-30s with Richard Hamilton's eyes and Eleanor's determined chin. Michelle Hamilton. Eleanor moved forward to embrace her niece, Richard's daughter, who had been just 4 years old when her father died. Thank you for coming. Michelle had flown in from Oregon overnight after Eleanor called with news of their discoveries. She approached the station with visible emotion, running her hand along the weathered brick exterior. My whole life people called him a thief, a man who stole millions, then killed himself out of guilt. Michelle's voice caught. Even after I was grown, there was always this shadow, the Hamilton legacy. Not anymore. Eleanor linked arms with her niece. Now everyone will know the truth. They took Michelle through the station, showing her the basement lockers, the hidden office explaining the significance of the third-floor discovery. With each revelation, Michelle's expression shifted from pain to pride, decades of shame transforming into vindication. He could have stayed silent. Michelle stood in her father's hidden office, touching the desk where he'd written his final journal entries. Could have taken their bribes, looked the other way. Most people would have. That wasn't who he was. Eleanor smiled sadly. Even when we were children, Richard could never abide injustice. It was his strength and his vulnerability. Michelle turned to Melissa, studying her with intensity. And you found all this because you needed a home for your children, just looking for shelter. Melissa had repeated this phrase so many times over the past months, to reporters, investigators, congressional committees, that it had become almost a mantra. The simplicity of it still felt jarring against the complexity of what had followed. My father would have liked that. Michelle smiled, the first genuine smile since her arrival, that his truth was found by someone just trying to build a future for their family. It's what he was trying to do too, in his way. As construction crews arrived for the day's work, the three women walked through the station discussing plans for what would become the Richard Hamilton Memorial Room, a dedicated space within the community center to tell the story of one man's stand against corruption. Michelle offered photographs from her personal collection, memories of the father she'd barely known, but whose legacy she'd carried. The station buzzed with activity as workers continued the transformation. Plumbers installing bathroom fixtures, electricians running conduit through century-old walls, carpenters restoring intricate moldings to their former glory. Within the chaos of creation, Melissa caught glimpses of the future. Children studying in renovated offices, families receiving assistance in what had once been the ticket hall community gatherings in the vast main concourse. Nathan had appointed himself unofficial site supervisor, trailing behind contractors with a notebook recording measurements and decisions with meticulous care. Sophia flitted between work crews collecting discarded treasures. An antique doorknob, a piece of decorative trim, a fragment of colored glass, building her own history from the station's remnants. Lucas, now fully recovered from his heart surgery, sat on a bench drawing elaborate pictures of trains and passengers populating the station with the ghosts of its former purpose. His health had stabilized in the months since their desperate days in the van, his color good, his energy boundless. The real transformation isn't the building. Eleanor watched the children with a wistful smile. It's them. They've gone from homeless to having purpose. That's rarer than going from poor to rich. Melissa could only nod, throat tight with emotion. The money from the whistleblower reward had secured their future. Lucas's medical care college fund's financial stability. But it was the station that had given them roots connection meaning. The children didn't talk about the reward. They talked about their castle, their community center, their mission. The afternoon brought a familiar black town car winding up the station's newly paved driveway. Judge Crawford emerged today in civilian clothes rather than judicial robes. Behind her came Christopher, clutching a leather portfolio and looking more rested than Melissa had seen him since their ordeal began. The federal investigation has expanded significantly following discovery of the tapes. Judge Crawford dispensed with pleasantries, moving directly to business as they gathered in what would become the center's conference room. 15 more individuals have been indicted, including former Director Stevens and 3 former intelligence officials. And Crawford Eleanor asked the question they all wanted answered. Still fighting extradition, but Venezuela's position is weakening. Christopher opened his portfolio, extracting documents with highlighted sections. Their Supreme Court has ruled that conspiracy to murder isn't covered under their political asylum protections. It's just a matter of time now. Melissa absorbed the update, still adjusting to her unlikely role in this national drama. 6 months ago, her greatest concern had been finding enough quarters for the laundromat. Now she sat in strategy sessions with federal judges and Senate investigators, discussing the downfall of power brokers she'd once only glimpsed on television. The community center's progress is impressive. Judge Crawford surveyed the renovation, genuine admiration in her voice. When is the opening scheduled? 3 weeks. Melissa consulted her calendar, once filled with job applications and medical appointments, now crowded with contractor meetings and program planning sessions. We're starting with the after-school program, food pantry, and legal aid clinic. The medical services will come online next month when the licensing is finalized. You've accomplished in 6 months what most nonprofits take years to build. The judge's praise was measured but sincere. The station had transformed from derelict building to community beacon with remarkable speed, fueled by Melissa's determination and the symbolism the site had acquired in the public imagination. I had good motivation. Melissa thought of the families she'd met while homeless, living in cars' motel rooms, doubled up with relatives. The system that had failed her hadn't magically improved for others. The station represented more than her family's salvation. It offered a model for community-based solutions to systemic failures. As Judge Crawford and Christopher departed with promises to return for the opening ceremony, Melissa found herself drawn back to Richard Hamilton's hidden office. The space remained as they had found it, preserved now as part of the historical record, but also as a quiet sanctuary amid the renovation chaos. She sat at the desk where Richard had written his final warnings, trying to imagine his thoughts in those last days. The knowledge that powerful men wanted him silenced, the desperate effort to preserve evidence, the hope that somehow, someday, someone would find his hidden truth and bring it to light. On impulse, she opened the journal again, turning to the final pages. After the last dated entry came a passage without date, written in a hand less steady than the earlier entries. To whoever finds this, I don't know who you are or when you are reading these words. Perhaps years have passed. Perhaps the world has changed enough that what I've documented here seems like ancient history. Or perhaps these abuses of power continue, only the names and methods evolving with time. I've been told I'm being naive, that sometimes the rules must be broken for the greater good. That loyalty to country means loyalty to those who claim to speak in its name. I reject this. A nation of laws cannot survive exceptions made by powerful men in shadows. Truth may be inconvenient, but it remains truth, and without it, we build our future on quicksand. I've hidden the evidence where I hope it will eventually be found. I've created redundancies knowing they will try to erase all trace of their crimes. And I've made peace with what will likely happen to me. If you're reading this, know that I consider the price worth paying. Some burdens once glimpsed cannot be set down again with honor. May you use what you've found wisely. May it serve justice, not vengeance. And may it remind us all that in the ledger book of history, integrity leaves marks that power cannot erase. Melissa closed the journal carefully, understanding now why Richard Hamilton's story had resonated so deeply with her from the first moment Eleanor had spoken his name. They were connected across decades by the same fundamental choice. The harder path taken because children were watching, because integrity mattered more than comfort, because truth demanded witnesses even at great cost. The grand opening of the Santa Rosa Community Station arrived on a perfect autumn morning, the kind of crystalline California day that seemed to amplify colors and possibilities. The restored building gleamed in the sunshine, its red brick clean to original vibrancy, New windows sparkling the sweeping, curved roof of the platform, repaired and painted in historical colors. Nearly 300 people gathered on what had once been the train platform, now transformed into an outdoor event space. Rows of chairs faced a small podium, behind which hung a banner reading Santa Rosa Community Station, where every journey matters. Melissa adjusted Nathan's tie as they prepared to greet the arriving guests. The children had insisted on dressing formally, Nathan in a suit that already seemed too small to his growing frame. Sophia in a blue dress with a ribbon in her carefully brushed hair, Lucas in miniature khakis and a button-down shirt that he'd somehow already managed to stain with juice. "I'm nervous." Nathan's admission came reluctantly, his eyes scanning the growing crowd. "Me too," Melissa straightened his collar. "It's okay to be nervous when something matters." Dignitaries began arriving. The mayor, city council members, nonprofit leaders, federal officials involved in the Crawford investigation. Eleanor came with Michelle, both wearing blue dresses in subtly different shades, their silver and dark hair creating a visual connection across generations. Christopher arrived with Rachel Martinez, whose coverage of the Hamilton vindication, as the Washington Post had branded, it had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. Judge Crawford came flanked by her clerks, nodding approvingly at the station's transformation. The most unexpected guest arrived last. A slender man in his 70s, walking with a cane, his eyes taking in the restored station with visible emotion. Eleanor spotted him first, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise. "Thomas," she crossed to him quickly. "Thomas Stevens. I didn't think you'd come." Former Treasury Director, Stevens, now frail and diminished from the powerful man on Richard Hamilton's tapes, clasped Eleanor's hand with both of his. "I needed to see it, to see what Richard's courage built." His attendance was complicated. He had been indicted based on the recovered tapes but had accepted a plea deal, offering testimony against higher-ranking officials in exchange for consideration in sentencing. His presence at the opening represented both an acknowledgement of past wrongs and a step toward whatever redemption might be possible. As the ceremony began, Melissa took her place at the podium, looking out over the assembled crowd. Journalists lined the back cameras ready. Community members filled the middle rows, some who would be served by the center, others who had volunteered in its creation. In the front sat those most intimately connected to the station's story: Eleanor, Michelle, Christopher, Rachel, Judge Crawford, and yes, even Thomas Stevens, whose presence embodied the complex moral calculus of justice and redemption. 6 months ago, Melissa began, her voice steady despite the flutters in her stomach. "I bought this building because I needed walls to protect my children. I found something else entirely, a truth that powerful men had killed to hide." She outlined the station's journey, from abandoned relic to desperate shelter, to center of national scandal, to community resource. She spoke of Richard Hamilton's courage, of Eleanor's persistence, of how ordinary people found extraordinary strength when pushed to their limits. This station will no longer hide secrets in its basement. Instead, it will shelter families who have nowhere else to go. It will feed the hungry, teach the willing, and remind us all that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to be silenced. As Melissa cut the ceremonial ribbon, applause thundered across the platform. The crowd surged forward, eager to tour the renovated spaces. The food pantry and what had once been the restaurant, classrooms in former administrative offices, a medical clinic in the old baggage area, and the Richard Hamilton Memorial Room, where his story was told through photographs, documents, and artifacts. The children led tours with practiced enthusiasm. Nathan explaining the solar panels and energy-efficient systems with technical precision. Sophia showing off the art room where children could create while their parents received services. Lucas proudly demonstrating the reading nook filled with donated books. As the crowd dispersed throughout the building, Melissa found a quiet moment on the platform. The autumn breeze carried the scent of new beginnings. Fresh paint, newly turned earth in the community garden, the subtle perfume of the native plants landscapers had installed along the perimeter. "You did it." Eleanor joined, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You turned a monument to corruption into something beautiful." "We did it," Melissa corrected gently. "All of us together." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Richard would be proud, not just of the truth coming out, but of what you've built on the foundation of that truth." As the day progressed, Melissa circulated through the station, watching with quiet satisfaction as visitors explored the transformed spaces. The community had embraced the center even before its official opening. Volunteers staffing the food pantry, retired teachers offering tutoring, medical professionals donating time to the clinic. In the memorial room, Michelle Hamilton stood before a photograph of her father, young, smiling, unaware of what awaited him. Thomas Stevens had joined her, his expression a complex mixture of regret and respect. He never wanted to be a hero. Michelle's voice carried no bitterness toward this man who had been part of the system that killed her father. He just couldn't live with being part of something wrong. I was a coward. Stevens spoke softly, leaning heavily on his cane. I told myself it was patriotism, national security, but it was cowardice, fear of losing position, power, relevance. He was the brave one. Their conversation, this unlikely reconciliation between victim's daughter and perpetrator, embodied the center's highest aspirations. Healing truth, the difficult work of moving forward without forgetting the past. As afternoon faded toward evening, the crowds thinned. Staff and volunteers began the cleanup, preparing for the center's first official day of operation tomorrow. Melissa found herself drawn to the main hall, now furnished with comfortable seating, resource materials, computer stations, a welcoming space for those in need. A familiar figure stood examining the restored ticket windows, now repurposed as intake stations for various services. Agent Brennan, no longer in a dark suit, but dressed in civilian clothes, his posture less rigid than Melissa remembered. He turned as she approached, his expression guarded. "I didn't expect to see you here." Melissa kept her distance, the memory of his arm around her throat still viscerally present. Brennan's gaze dropped briefly. "I've been cooperating with the federal prosecutors. Part of my agreement includes community service hours." He gestured vaguely around the station. "I thought perhaps here would be appropriate." The request stunned Melissa. This man had threatened her children, had been willing to kill to protect his secrets. And now he stood in her community center asking for redemption. Why, the question escaped before she could formulate a more eloquent response. Brennan seemed to have anticipated this. "Because I need to see what exists when we choose construction over destruction. For 30 years, I justified everything in the name of national security. The threats to the cover-ups." He gestured toward the Richard Hamilton Memorial Room. "But he was right, and I was wrong. I need to understand what that means for the rest of my life." Melissa studied him, searching for insincerity, for manipulation, finding instead the uncomfortable complexity of human redemption. "I'll need to think about it. This is a healing place. I need to be certain you're here to heal, not to ease your conscience." Brennan nodded, accepting the boundary. "I understand." He placed a business card on a nearby table. "If you decide yes, this is how to reach me. And if the answer is no, I'll respect that too." After he left, Melissa remained in the main hall contemplating the encounter. The center would serve many in need of second chances. Those recovering from addiction, rebuilding after incarceration, starting over after loss. Could that redemptive purpose extend even to a man who had once been her persecutor? The question had no easy answer, and perhaps that was the point. The journey from abandoned station to community center had never been about easy answers. It had been about hard choices, unexpected turns, the courage to keep moving forward when the path disappeared into darkness. As twilight deepened, Melissa made a final walk through the building, checking locks, turning off lights, preparing for tomorrow's official opening. In the Richard Hamilton Memorial Room, she paused before the centerpiece display. The journal found in the hidden office opened to the final undated entry. Beside it stood a photograph of the station in its derelict state, contrasted with an artist's rendering of the completed community center. The juxtaposition told the whole story. From abandonment to purpose, from secrets to truth, from isolation to community. The station had come full circle, returning to its original function as a place of arrivals and departures, of journeys beginning and lives transforming. In the parking lot, Nathan waited by the car, keys in hand, newly licensed and eager to practice driving. Sophia had already claimed the front passenger seat, leaving Lucas to bounce impatiently in the back. The normalcy of their squabbles, their expectations, their security, this was the true miracle of the past 6 months. "Ready to go home?" Nathan's question carried the quiet pride of a young man growing into responsibility. Melissa looked back at the station, silhouetted against the darkening skylights, glowing from windows that had once been broken and boarded over. Home had become a more complex concept than simply walls and a roof. It encompassed purpose, community, legacy. "Yes," she said, sliding into the passenger seat beside Sophia. "Let's go home." As they drove away, Melissa watched the station recede in the side mirror. Tomorrow it would welcome its first official visitors. Families seeking food, children needing after-school care, adults looking for legal advice or medical attention. The work was just beginning, the true measure of success yet to be determined. But in this moment, watching her son navigate the darkening streets with careful concentration, feeling her daughter's head gradually drooping against her shoulder as sleep claimed her, hearing Lucas's soft snores from the back seat, Melissa knew with absolute certainty that Richard Hamilton's sacrifice had not been in vain. Some journeys began with desperation and ended with purpose. Some buildings stood vacant for decades, waiting for the right moment to fulfill their destiny. Some truths remained buried until exactly the right person came searching for something else entirely. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world was a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The perfect messenger for a truth that had waited 40 years to be heard. The train station that had once sheltered her family in its darkest hour now stood ready to shelter hundreds more. The accidental whistleblower had become an intentional builder of community. The desperate search for walls had expanded into a vision for bridges between people, between past and future, between need and possibility. In the morning, they would begin again. But tonight, driving home under stars that had witnessed both Richard Hamilton's final days and this new beginning, Melissa allowed herself to feel the rarest of emotions in a journey defined by struggle. Contentment, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her children safe beside her, and a future stretching before them like an open track full of promise and purpose.